Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. Thanks for tuning into this episode. I've been wanting to get my friend Brian Ellison on the podcast for quite a while, and thank you, Brian, for joining us today.
I'm honored to be with you.
Yeah, Brian and I served as colleagues in the Northland as pastors. He was at Parkville Presbyterian Church. I was at Vineyard Church, and we became acquainted and hung out, had dinners, went to, I think, to a Royals game or two, and we're colleagues. But there were underlying issues going on, but in his world, my world, that we're going to talk about today as they have come to fruition. And Brian today works with the Covenant Network of Presbyterians as the executive director. He's been doing that since 2012. I always like to tell people that he's a Harvard and Princeton grad, which Brian then immediately says, "Oh, now people won't want to listen to me anyway." But I don't know. You know, I think I would be proud of it if I were.
Don't hold it against me.
Yeah. So also you work at KCUR, which is one of our local radio stations as well. And so Brian, let's jump into your story, because this is what we're wanting to do. As you pastored Parkville Presbyterian Church, you were a single pastor. I'm a single pastor now too, by the way, pastoring single. There were all kinds of issues going on that we really didn't talk much about. So, but let's jump into your story, where you were born, kind of your origins, and then we're going to bring people along into where you're at today and the work that you're doing today.
Sure. Well, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. My whole family's still out there. That's where I was born and went to school until I went off to college, as you said, on the East Coast, and went to seminary on the East Coast as well. And then when it got to be 1999, I was graduating from seminary and looking for churches, and I checked all the boxes on the Presbyterian Church kind of uses I called it a computer dating service. You know, you filled out the form of what you were looking for, and the churches filled out the form of what they were looking for, and you got matched up. And I checked all the boxes for states that were touching an ocean. And somehow I got matched with this church in Parkville, Missouri, which was on the coast of the Missouri River.
Right.
But it turned out to be an amazing, great fit. The people of Parkville Presbyterian Church were mission-oriented and outward-looking, and a great group. And I stayed there for 13 years as their pastor. But of course, as you've alluded, there were other things going on as well. I mean, and I'll keep talking until you tell me to stop. I mean, one of the really important pieces of context there is that the Presbyterian Church USA, the denomination I'm part of, was in the midst of of decades of debate over the role of LGBTQIA plus people in the church. Now, I was gay. When I was growing up, I was in a pretty conservative church. I was not able to sort of admit to myself that it was even possible to be Christian and gay. Um, I didn't have a lot of models of that around me. Um, I went off to college, and although the school I attended would have been accepting and affirming, I was involved in a pretty evangelical campus ministry, which was a great thing for me on a lot of levels. It's where I experienced a call to ministry. It's where I got the opportunity to uh, teach Bible study and lead large group meetings. And I mean, it's really where I decided to go to seminary. But at the same time, it was not a place that would have been safe for me to process and openly talk about my identity as a gay person. So I just sort of shoved that down and hoped it would go away, and went off to seminary. And I was sort of still doing that, even as I um, had to admit to myself that's really who I was. The church was right then, while I was in seminary, the denomination was voting to formally exclude LGBTQ people from ordination.
Wow.
Um, that happened while I was in seminary. And so any thought I had of really processing that and being open about that would have meant, choosing to walk away from this thing I felt called to do, and that I was already professionally on the journey of. Um, and frankly, I wasn't so sure. I jokingly say sometimes that I'm more Presbyterian than I am gay. I am sort of congenitally Presbyterian, and the reality is that I really couldn't imagine just walking away to some other denomination or some other tradition at that time. And so I wasn't in a relationship, and I proceeded to be ordained. I wasn't violating any policies at that time because I wasn't with anybody, and I sort of thought maybe I'll be celibate. Maybe I'll be single my whole life. Maybe I'll meet the woman of my dreams, and she'll sweep me off my feet, and everything will change. Um, there were no women in my dreams, is the problem. So, um, uh, and so I was ordained in 1999, and I started to serve as pastor of a church. But and you're busy in your first years as a pastor of a church. I had plenty going on, but after a couple of years, um, it turns out I'm not called to singleness. It turns out I was longing to be in relationship, and eventually found myself, even though I was in the closet, um, seeking the opportunity to be in a relationship. Um, and so in 2003, 4 years into my ministry, I met the person who is now my partner and has been for 22 years, Troy. Um, that was and that entered into then this new season of my ministry of trying to figure out what that looked like and how to live as a pastor and be faithful to my calling and faithful to my partner and faithful um, to my own identity all at the same time. And it wasn't always easy or even possible. The a lot of those years, including the years that we knew each other, Fred, I was, um, trying to do the best I could, trying to avoid outright lying to people, while also sort of trying to maintain some boundaries in private parts of my life that I wasn't fully sharing. Um, you know, it, in the end, well, not in the end, but along the way, there was sort of this decision: what would be the right thing for me to do? This is obviously held in tension here. Certainly, I would have considered, and I did consider, sort of coming out and sort of just dropping the bomb on the congregation, even though that was against church policy, and letting the chips fall where they may. And there would have been plenty of people in that church who would have supported me if I had done that, but it also would have been very divisive. It would have created a whole lot of problems, and that didn't feel fair to them. Um, uh, I also could have walked away more quietly, just sort of said I was going to pursue other things. But you got to understand that church was growing. We had called an associate pastor at that point. We were doing a building project. We did a major, doubled the size of our physical space. The church was, a lot of good things were happening. God was doing good things in that church. And so that didn't feel faithful either. That felt like that would have been an incomplete thing to do. And of course, it's been pointed out, I could have also ended my relationship and tried the singleness thing again, but that didn't seem faithful either. And so we kept going. We kept living in tension. I didn't talk about people in our lives knew, friends knew, some colleagues knew, um, but I didn't talk about it at church, and that's how it remained until shortly before I ended my time at that church in 2012, after the Presbyterian Church changed its policies to allow for ordination. And it's then that I came out and also told the church that I was leaving and started this new job, which I've been doing for the last 13 years as executive director of the Covenant Network.
Yes, yes. Thank you for sharing all that. I'm curious a little bit, just to back up just a bit on your family dynamic. Like what?
Yeah.
Because don't you come from a pretty long tradition of Presbyterians? Is that right? Or
Yeah, I
family
mean
heritage?
that is true. My grandmother, who lived to be 111 years old, was as you might imagine, the longest member of the church that I grew up in. Actually, she was in a tie with my father, who joined when he was 10 years old, and so they, yeah, it was the same church my whole life, the church where I was baptized, the church where I was, I mean, baptized as a baby, where I was ordained as a youth deacon, where I got my first sermons were preached on Youth Sunday, where I was sent off to seminary, and where I was ordained as a minister.
Mm.
Um, that church also is no longer part of the Presbyterian Church USA because the PCUSA ordains people like me. Um,
Oh wow! So they departed and went to a more conservative
they were among
Presbyterian.
the many churches
Yep.
that left for other denominations, and um, which I still consider quite sad. Much of my family still goes to that church. Um, but that was the environment that I grew up in. So while it was Presbyterian, it wasn't part of a more inclusive or affirming tradition. I don't remember it ever being talked about while I was a kid. I just knew it wasn't a safe space to be honest about my thoughts and feelings about who I was.
Yeah, yeah. It's so fast. And when I think back on I did a bachelor of religion at Baylor and then a master of divinity at Southwestern Baptist Theological because I grew up Southern Baptist, right? And I don't remember having in those 8 years of education, I don't even remember having a 5 minute conversation with somebody about LGBTQ plus, stuff. Like it
Yeah.
was just like an assumption. Well, of course it's sinful, and then boom, that was the end of it. And
Right.
that it never even really got talked about or
Yeah.
discussed. And all through the '80s, basically, we were just like
Right.
not even talking about this stuff.
Well, and that's an important piece to, I mean, a lot of my work now is, sort of walking with people wherever they are in the journey and helping them take the next steps. And I don't deal with a whole lot of, super fundamentalist folks
Right.
I'm trying to change their minds of. But I will say that my own background and the people I know and love from the church I grew up in, including my own family, it reminds me that the decision to be exclusive or to not approve of LGBTQ people is not the exclusive terrain of fire breathing dragons. It it is folks who in some cases have never talked about it much or not really thought about it much. In some cases they have, but they've been the product of their environment and the influences and the voices that have been talking in their ears about this stuff from the earliest years of their lives have not really changed. And so I'm a little more sympathetic. I'm a little more patient than I think maybe some people would be. um, um, but it also, I mean, the flip side of that observation, Fred, is that it also shows you why it's so insidious, this this exclusion of LGBTQ people from the church. Um, the it's all wrapped in love and care for people, but in fact, it has the slow but sure effect of diminishing their humanity, of saying them that they are lesser, that that the love they have is not a love that comes from God, when the Scripture tells us that love is from God.
Hmm.
Um, um, and and for those messages to be delivered subtly or not so subtly, decade after decade of one's life, by the church, by the people who are preaching, by the people who are caring for you, um, takes a huge toll and is devastating.
Mm.
Um, and is part of why the church still struggles so to, even progressive churches, even churches that are trying to do everything right and are flying rainbow flags out front and are, blessing and marrying same-sex couples, they still struggle to to be effective in that ministry, to make people really feel loved and feel included. And part of why is that they're competing with, generations um, of yuck, of hurt, that they couldn't just snap their fingers and undo. And I'm not sure we always realize that, even in progressive churches, that just because we say you're welcome, um, doesn't undo the hurt that the church, capital C church, has caused.
Yeah. Was your own, like your parents, and do you have siblings? Did
Yeah, I mean,
were
I
they
do, and I don't want to,
just
yeah,
curious?
I have a sister, and I have stepbrother and stepsister. And my parents were divorced.
Were
I
they, uh, as you processed this, were they at all a part of the processing or was it, did you have support from your primary family or not?
I mean, the coming out, I mean, the start of my relationship, this long-term relationship that I'm still in, is really when I started to tell my family about it. And so that I was 29 when that started. Um, so I was informing them more than processing it with them.
Hmm.
Um, and I would say there were a variety of responses. I mean, the parts of my family that were still involved in the church were certainly not so happy about it. Um, and I think they've been on a journey too. They were never discourteous. They were never mean. Um, my partner, is with me at family gatherings, and is a beloved part of the family. Um, and some of the family is completely accepting and approving. Um, Others, I think, struggle with it, but have chosen to not cut me off, and I'm grateful for that. And I accept that people are on a journey. Um, an interesting piece of this is my grandmother, who, um, anyone who knows me for very long knows that my grandmother is the heart and soul of my faith, even still, even after she died 5 years ago. Um, I can't really imagine anything I know about what it is to live as a person of faith without thinking about examples of my grandmother's life. Um, and she is not someone I ever sat down and said, "Hey, Grandma, I'm gay." Um, but Troy, my partner, from almost as soon as I introduced him the family, he not only was part of my grandmother's life, we stayed together at my grandmother's house every time we visited the Pacific Northwest. And um, Grandma never once needed to talk about that, or why it was that I brought this same person home with me every time I visited. She knew. She knew. I don't even know if she knew all the words for it, but she knew who he was. She told me to say hi to him every time we talked on the phone. She mentioned him in her letters to me. Um, and even though my grandmother was the matriarch of this church that was a place of exclusion, um, she wasn't a matriarch of exclusion. She was modeling this humble, kind, um, compassionate love that I only wish I could model as well as she does or did.
Yeah. So, when we were colleagues, obviously we didn't talk about your sexuality, um, and you would have probably not thought that I was a safe person to talk about that. And with the tradition that I inherited, my Southern Baptist background, when I planted Vineyard, I would have thought, my thought was, well, yeah, homosexuality is a sin, but it's not a sin any different than mine. So therefore, we should extend grace.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I had LGBTQ people in my church from day one, actually, pretty quickly. I mean, I say not from day one because it was just me and my wife and a friend couple. But within 2 years, we had LGBTQ plus, but they were people from conservative backgrounds who were trying to pray the gay away.
Right.
And
You
so
were extending them the grace of hospitality. You were welcoming them into your presence, but
we were not affirming.
right. You weren't
Right.
celebrating God's presence
Correct.
in the fullness of who they were. Yeah.
Right. But again, I mean, I was just trying to take what I had been handed and put the most grace on it that I could. I want to get to how even what I was doing hurts people, right? Um, and so the people that came to my church were trying to pray the gay away. So then I connected them to, ironically, a ministry called Living Waters, which was connected to Exodus International.
Right.
Which I would recommend. There's a great documentary called Pray Away that I thought is a really interesting documentary on that whole movement of gay Christians trying to help other gay Christians not be gay anymore, And the idea that we had was that if you got inner healed enough, if you got enough good therapy, inner healing, whatever you want to call it, then you wouldn't be gay anymore, right? And so after pastoring friends of mine or people in my congregation for 10 years and watching them try to pray the gay away. And then one of my friends would say, like, after 10 years of going to all the therapy, praying as hard as I could, fasting, he is like, I was 1% less gay and I hated myself more.
Right.
And I literally had friends who, thinking of suicide because they're still gay and they can't get rid of their gayness and that kind of thing.
Right.
And at that point, that's when so that would have been for me, it would have been about year 2000, just shortly after you landed at Parkville Presbyterian. So it was at that point that I kind of started going, man, I got to rethink this. And then I'm dealing with those 6 clobber passages in the Bible that Christians have used against the LGBTQ plus community. And I had to start trying to rethink my whole approach to the Bible, my whole approach to those scriptures. Were those scriptures really saying what I had been told they said, and that started a journey for me that lasted a decade, honestly, just trying to rethink things. And I certainly stopped trying to get LGBTQ people to stop being LGBTQ plus Q. I at least started doing that, but I was in a movement that wasn't open and affirming. We couldn't,
right.
They could serve in any way in the church, but we couldn't ordain them into ministry, and we couldn't do a gay wedding in my movement, right? So I'm now in an open and affirming church. I've rethought all of that, rethought my approach to the Bible. I recommend books, but your work that you do now with churches, with the Covenant Network of Presbyterians, I'm guessing that there's a lot of guys and women out there that are like me that you work with. I'm guessing, maybe not. I don't know, but
yeah, no. I mean, I think yes.
I want to give you the freedom to dig into who I was at that time and how that isn't safe and how that still perpetuates harm to this community, which I think a lot of people still don't realize that. They think just being welcoming is cool.
Yeah. Well, but not only is it not enough to just be welcoming. In some ways, it's worse. It's worse to welcome people into a place where they will not be affirmed. It's worse to welcome people into a place where, as you said, your church member who was 1% less gay and hated himself a lot more. Like, it would have been better for you to not be so welcoming.
It was like a trap, right?
Right. Well, and that's sort of what I say to churches, including very well-meaning churches who come to my organization because they want to be more welcoming of LGBTQ people. And then but I want to talk with them and say, so let's talk about how welcoming you actually are. I mean, well, not Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so who sit in the second pew. They're gonna glare at whoever walks in the door, and not, we're not going to do any big public gay weddings. I mean, but we really want people to what come. And it's, that I don't get a whole lot of that, but there are churches that are not as far along as their desire to have more butts in the pews is outpacing their authentic celebration of God's gifts and presence in the lives of LGBTQ people. And and that is what I tell them. I say, please don't join an organization like ours. Don't put a pride flag out in front of your church until you are actually ready to say this and mean it fully, because otherwise you are tricking people into a situation that they've been wounded in before, and they're going to get wounded again, and it'll hurt worse. Now, that said, no church is perfect. Even the ones that do this really well still misstep. And LGBTQ people, for the most part, if they are in a church at all, if there are people who are seeking faith communities, they're prepared to show some grace. I mean, most of us are prepared to say we can tell when someone's trying and screwing up versus when someone is trying to harm us. So, it's not to say that a church, in order to be authentically welcoming, has to have everything figured out and have it all together and be 100% on the same page. But I think the distinction that you're making about your own background, Fred, and about kind of the position of the churches you were part of back then, is sadly true. I mean, even the founder of Exodus International, quit, shut it down,
Right.
stepped away and said, "Yeah, it actually doesn't work.
Right.
You actually can't stop being gay. That was my bad."
Yeah.
So
That wild. That was a international multi-million-dollar ministry, you know?
yeah.
I mean, had a lot of influence around the globe.
Yeah, well, and still the after effects of it still do in other countries in particular, which is, one of the great disasters of global Christianity, is that in certain countries,
Yeah.
the church is in partnership with oppressive governments in actually doing physical harm or putting the lives of queer people at risk.
And even death
Yeah, or
threats in
or
some
or killing
countries.
them. Yes, or supporting policies um, that would impose the death penalty or imprisonment for LGBTQ people. And so there's a lot of work to undo as best we can. This could be a whole nother podcast, but the international work of global human rights and Christian um, impact for better and worse in the lives of LGBTQ people is a story that is still sad and is still in pretty bad shape in a lot of the world.
Hmm. Yeah. When you let's say you're working with a church that isn't sure where they stand, but they're open, they're wanting to explore. What resources have you found that have been most helpful in helping congregations process? Because here's another little secret. There's a lot of pastors that are pastoring in churches that are not open and affirming to the LGBTQ plus community, but they've come to that decision personally behind the scenes, but they don't want to lose their job.
Right.
Their families taking their kids to conservative churches who themselves have family members who are gay, and but they're still going and attending churches that are not open and affirming to the
Right.
gay community.
Because they have a great children's program or really good
Exactly.
vacation Bible school. Yeah.
Exactly. Great worship, whatever, and so there's that whole contingency out there that is, like still supporting the kind of harm that the church has done to it, even though they're not outwardly supporting the harm. They're attending churches that still do harm. You know what I'm saying? So what resources have you found for those churches or people or pastors who finally do start going, okay, we got to rethink this. What give us some insight into the ministry of helping people along this continuum of becoming more loving, more affirming to human beings. I don't know how I don't know if my question's coming across well, but what are your best resources or things that you found most helpful to aiding congregations in that movement?
Well, I think, every congregation has to assess where it's at on its journey. But I think generally speaking, there's kind of two groups of resources that are going to be really helpful as initial steps to move forward. One is material resources, books and videos and things like that. There's a lot of good material out there. Some of it is written from the perspective of people who have been in an evangelical background and need to kind of process it through that lens. I'm thinking of folks like God and the Gay Christian by Matthew Vines, which is a pretty well-known book, just came out, I mean, this month with a new edition of that. Um, a little more scholarly book is called Bible, Gender, Sexuality, or I think that's the title, by James Brownson. A little more academic, but he comes out of a evangelical theological school tradition, and took a lot of flack for writing that book, which articulates an evangelical case for being more inclusive. Um, uh, but there's other books that I think deal in a more scholarly way, a more academic way that probably doesn't depend on a foundation of evangelical belief. And then there's some very practical ones, and this is really where I send congregations for the most part to books that are not really trying to make an argument so much as they are telling the stories of the lives of people who are affected by these issues we're talking about, right? That I'm thinking of a book called The Bible's Yes to Same-Sex Marriage by Mark Ochtemeyer. Mark Ochtemeyer was a seminary professor from a conservative background who changed his mind about the issue, but talks about the lives of his students being the biggest factor in changing his mind. Um, I'm thinking of books like Austin Hartkey's book Transforming the Lives of Transgender Christians,
Hmm.
where the his retelling of the stories of their lives is as much a part of a theological argument of coming to a better understanding of gender identity and gender diversity. Um, and to that end, the other set of resources besides books and videos and the like that, and if people wanted specific guidance and specific recommendations for their particular situations and their particular topics and kind of church, I'd be glad to talk through with people what resources would be the right fit for them. There's lots of those
Yeah.
those
And go
determining
ahead.
factors.
How
But
would they get a hold of you?
so I will give you that. Visit our website. Please place it on the screen right here. No,
Do that.
covenetpres.org. It's covenetpres.org,
Okay.
which has a great searchable resource page that can
Say
help
it one
you.
more time. Sam's getting it down here.
It's it's the Covenant Network of Presbyterians. So it's Covenant Pres, COVNETPRES.org. And you can also email me. My email address is on that website. The other group of resources, though, is not paper and books and websites at all. It's people, and I can't say strongly enough how much the church is strengthened when it actually enters into relationship with LGBTQIA plus people and doesn't just want to debate this as an issue or study Bible passages as a way of sort of getting to a truth apart from the reality that it is about people's lives. Um, no part of Christian tradition has ever said you should only look at the words on a page and ignore the people. um, the Holy Spirit works through people. Christ is alive and present in people, and and those people are sometimes in your church and they're sometimes outside the church. And those are voices that need to be part of your conversation if you're really listening to God to
Mm.
make sense of the scriptures and to make sense of our historic theology. Um, and so the resource I would commend is to find the queer folks in your community, and whether they are members of your church or folks who've left your church or the children of members of your church who didn't come back, or people out in the community who are engaging in life without the church because they don't think it's a place for them. We need to hear all of that.
Mm.
I said this, I think I may have said it when I visited your church, Fred. I am familiar with the books that tackle the clobber passages, as you
Right.
said. I know how to argue about the meaning of the Hebrew words in Leviticus and the fact that Romans 1 does not actually use the word homosexuality because there is no Greek word for homosexuality. I can I can have this conversation with you. I can argue till I'm blue in the face. I'm a professional gay. I'm really good at it. But but at the end of the day, I have never convinced anyone to change their mind about homosexuality by arguing with them. I never have. I have seen people change their mind and heart, though, and it's always been because of relationships, because of stories, because of their niece or their nephew or their grandchild or their pastor or their neighbor that first opened their eyes and ears and heart for them to say, wait a minute,
Mm.
they can't be, that's not right. They're not a sinner just because this couple loves each other. And once people are in that space of understanding that it's not wrong to feel your heart softening based on a relationship or based on someone's story, um, you'd be surprised how those scriptures start to read differently. Um, I've never suggested anyone needs to ignore the scriptures or um, just reject theology. That's not my position. But I think we read them through the lens of love and compassion and the way we see the Holy Spirit at work in people's lives. Um, and that's how we make sense of things that maybe at first don't make sense.
Mm. I love that. I mean, that's been my story, Brian, just pastoring people and having friends, I mean, like yourself, that, it caused me to rethink my theology, rethink my approach to the Bible, rethink my interpretation of certain passages. And yeah, I mean, that changed me and changed my thinking. And they were all people I loved from day one, right? There was never not a love. I just didn't know how to deal with it. And, of course, I was handed off that one statement that I think I dislike so intensely now. You got to love the sinner but hate the sin, and as my friends now, my friends in the gay community now, it's like, yeah, all we did was just get hated with that, it just turned into a
Right.
big way to hate people. Uh,
Yeah. Well, and I guess you can hate sin, but a person's identity isn't a sin, um, and if you really are going to follow that logic through, what you have to be able to defend the position that God allows this group of people to be so entrapped by their sin and not be rescued from it that 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 God wants them to keep sinning. I mean, there's really no sensible theological justification for that throwaway phrase about loving the sinner and hating the sin. You you know you it is not the same to say that a person who is prone to stealing things or um, committing assaults is in the same category as a person who is attracted to someone of the same sex. And let me also say, Fred, a lot of what we work on now is not just homosexuality, not gay and lesbian and bisexual people, but we talk a lot about gender identity and transgender people and non-binary people and the ways the church has actually been in recent years probably even more painfully excluding and failing to think theologically about about what inclusion of people of diverse gender identities really would look like and why it's so important. And, a lot of our churches were a lot clearer about why they condemned um, same-sex behaviors, citing particular scriptures, or the Presbyterian Church. We have a way of talking about things, which is to vote on them. So we would debate the ordination issue, or we would debate marriage, same-sex marriage, and year after year we'd go back to our national meetings and we'd vote on it again, and we'd vote on different proposals about it. And that's all good and well. It really was not good and well. It was terrible, but it was one way to talk about the issues. We never had a policy to vote on about transgender and non-binary people. And that allowed the whole church, generations of the church, to just not even think about what it would mean for someone to live in a body that doesn't match their self-understanding. And what kind of love and compassion would be required of us as the church toward a person who is in that space, and what that sort of person might have to offer the church in their different way of seeing the world and experiencing the world. Instead, the church in many places, unfortunately, has adopted kind of the same approach that a lot of the secular world is now taking with regard to that issue, which is it's different and I don't understand it, and therefore it must be bad. And that is causing immense pain, both on a public policy level and also in the church.
Yeah.
Even now.
Yeah. In my small church that I pastor now, we have several trans people in my church, dear friends. And I have, begun to talk about, your sexual orientation, who you love aren't sin issues. They're just humanity. And I always like to say God's gender fluid. From the beginning, and,
Yeah.
Almost there's so much of nature that is intersexed, transgendered.
Yeah.
It's not
Literally from the beginning,
yeah,
literally Genesis chapter 1, it
exactly.
says male and female, God created them. That in the image of God, God created them. The whole God is not it does not fit easily into any box. That is like an abiding message of Genesis 1. There's no way to read that any other way. And the gymnastics of biblical interpretation that are required to turn some of these passages into passages that exclude people or limit God is kind of amazing to me.
Yes.
Genesis 1 and 2, the very way creation is depicted is non-binary.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
it is portrayed as, we say, and God made night and God made day. Well, that might seem binary, except that we experience night and day, and we know that it's not, right? We know there's also sunrise and sunset. There's dusk and dawn. We know that it actually doesn't just flip a switch from night to day. There's everything in between. It talks about God making the land and the sea. But if you've ever been to the ocean, I know we live in Missouri, but if you've been to the ocean, you know that there's this space in between where it is sometimes land and sometimes sea. And in fact, where it's kind of neither completely, where it has its own ecosystem, its own set of life and beauty. And that is part of God's creation. And it's right there in Genesis 1.
Yeah.
If you use your brain. And I think we have to kind of stop reading the scriptures as a way to exclude people, but read them in the broader, overarching principles of God's amazing love and grace.
Yeah. I'm with you 100%, Brian. Well, listen, I know you've got a tight time frame today, but thank you so much for being on Spirituality Adventures. I've been wanting to introduce you to the folks that listen to Spirituality Adventures, and I highly recommend Brian and the resources that he's recommending. Go to the website. We're going to put it up on the YouTube, as well as those who are listening. We repeated it there a couple of times, so you can go back and get that down. And thank you, Brian, for just, you've been a great, loving, kind example for me to learn from, and I appreciate your love and friendship.
Well, and Fred, let me also say, I am grateful for you. I'm grateful for your honesty of your own journey, including sort of acknowledging these things from the past that now you look back on, and maybe you find them a little cringy now, but the truth is we all have that in our journey, and we all, if we are honest and authentic with each other about that, the church is a much stronger place. So I'm very grateful to kind of platform some honest conversation about that, and glad to share a little tiny piece of your journey, and glad that you share a little tiny piece of mine, and that we have this opportunity to keep moving forward together.
Excellent. Plus, we both love the NAI basketball tournament.
We do, and baseball.
And baseball. Yeah, we got to get to a game too. All right. Well, hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and thank you, Brian, so much. See you next time. Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.